when I started the page, I was like, there are probably hundreds. There are thousands of people who have been negatively impacted by James River.
Hello and welcome to the Bad Fruit Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan. Today's episode is part 2 of my interview with Kadie, the creator of the Facebook group Finding Jesus After Leaving James River. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, just pause this and go back and listen to her previous episode from last week. And come back and you can listen to this one afterwards. In part 1, you'll hear her introduce herself and talk about her time at James River. We've talked about healings and the church, how when somebody is not healed, it puts a burden upon them. We've actually gotten a lot of really good feedback from the listeners because of that episode, so thank you so much for reaching out to us. This week we jump right back into our interview. We pick up where we left off discussing the creation of Kadie's group, and then we talk about the Show Me the Toes fiasco, which is from the 2023 Week of Power at James River, where Bill Johnson was speaking. John Lindell claimed to have seen a picture of the regrown toes. That has been debunked. There is no picture of regrown toes. Sorry. Later in this episode, we do talk about the 2024 Stronger Men's Conference, where John kicked Mark Driscoll off stage. And we also discuss NAR, which stands for the New Apostolic Reformation. For those not familiar with NAR, it is an unofficial movement of churches and people who believe that the offices of apostle and prophet are still for us today in the modern church. Bill Johnson and Bethel are heavily associated with NAR, and John Lindell has welcomed many of the NAR pastors into James River with open arms. I hope you enjoyed part 1. And now here's part 2 and the conclusion of my interview with Kadie. What were your thoughts when the whole Show Me the Toad thing went down? Were you following that
Yes.
fiasco going down?
Yeah.
What were your thoughts? Did you believe it was a real healing? And then tack onto that a question of when John said that he had seen the picture of the toes, did you believe him? And then now maybe talk about the stuff that's come out most recently.
So I didn't. I know there are a lot of people who are like, well, I don't doubt that. Well-meaning people. It's not a criticism of their faith. A lot of well-meaning people are like, well, God can heal, and He can.
Sure.
But I was like, no, this didn't happen. And especially with some of the news stories about how she lost her toes, kind of her personal life. Not saying God can't, but like, are you like a real Christian? Are you just somebody who attends James River? Like what are the circumstances and how does this actually edify the body? First off, Lyndall and Bill's stories don't match up. That's or Chrissy's. Those three testimonies did not line up. That's like
Right, it's weird.
like telephone. I'm like, no, this didn't happen. So that's why I didn't believe it. When he said he saw pictures, and I can't really say verbatim, but basically he wasn't going to show them, he wasn't going to do anything. To me, it was very much an internal control type, damage control type situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not that I'm like very experienced work wise, but my degree was in public relations, so I studied some of this in college. But I think that really a lot of his messaging appealed to the congregation, like, oh, we're going to protect one of our own. But in reality, if you already like gave her information and her testimony out publicly, so you're not protecting her. That's why Show Me the Toes for a while there stood by her as a victim, which I totally understand. But it was a kind of a PR stunt to protect them to not release the photos. But my perspective is you would think that if God did something like this, first off, you would think that if somebody's toes, let's just really visualize this for a second.
Right.
If somebody's toes were actually growing out of their foot in real time, with TikTok and Snapchat, you're telling me nobody thought to go click video? Like, nobody? Like, I don't, that's first off. But second off, to not show pictures, like, that would be one of the greatest things to edify the body if you're somebody at James River. That would be one of the biggest marketing, PR, perfect situations for you.
Sure, yeah.
And you blew it up.
Miracle happened.
Yeah, and so the fact that they didn't show it was very telling to me that it something wasn't accurate, something wasn't lining up. Either it didn't happen or the story was wrong. And so I didn't believe it. And I'm not shocked that the stuff has come out that has now. When Show Me the Toes did finally post those pictures, I don't know if it was specifically because I had sent them or somebody else had sent them. I think you could tell that the people who thought she was a victim were like, no, this was a whole scam. This was an entire scam. And I think that it's really hurtful, especially because I know you haven't touched on this, but I talked about in my post. My daughter, was born with one functioning kidney, and she's thriving, by the way. Like,
good, yeah.
Very worried when
Very good.
when it's your first kid and you're like 21 turning 22, not ideal. And that to say, there are moms and families that struggle with so much worse diagnoses out there, but to have any at all is just not
Yeah,
fun.
you want your kids healthy, happy,
You
all that.
you want your kid to like come out like just as one would say normal. I know people hate that word now, but normal. And so the family members of mine who are very, I mean, very into James River, like to the point where I'm like, you are a cult follower of James River. I had gone on a graduation trip with one of my friends, and I was also pregnant at the time with another baby, by the way, because my kids are Irish twins, and we're crazy like that. But he had also shown potential kidney issues as well through his ultrasounds, and my daughter did the whole time as well. So it's something that runs in my family. Praise God, this baby doesn't have anything. Hopefully, he doesn't develop anything. But my mom had my daughter while I was on this trip and went to see these family members. And these family members basically were asking about the kidney and had asked us at like her diagnosis appointments because we had to, go up to a specialty clinic.
Sure, yeah.
She's little. And actually, before I tell that story relating to the toes, I remember we went up to see what was wrong. And what we were portrayed at the time was that our daughter was either going to have a mild issue she would grow out of or something that would require surgery.
Oh.
Surgery is scary on a little baby,
Well, yeah.
but the idea it's a fixable condition. Well, we went up there and got blindsided. They showed us the ultrasound pictures on my daughter, and essentially her ureter and kidneys don't line up. And they basically and I don't hate the way they said it, but very bluntly, they're like, there's not a good way to put this, but she has a bum kidney. That was not what we were expecting.
Yeah.
So I was very, of course, they're like, she's probably gonna live a healthy life. We're gonna have a follow up appointment, whatever. It very devastating here. I remember right when we got out of that appointment, this family member of mine called, and they were on the way. She was like, we're praying that God's gonna do this, and I applaud for like consistency with the faith in that. But when I told them this is the situation, they actually sounded not disappointed in a way where like it's sad news, but disappointed in a way where it's like they were somehow surprised. Like they prayed enough. So fast forward a few months later, they're over there and my mom is explaining updates on the kidneys, which are all good updates, but of course one does not work. And so my family member looks at my daughter, to my mom's recollection, and says, if God can regrow 3 toes, he can grow you a new kidney. And that really set off a really big division where I'm like, this is not okay. You're not going to say that to my daughter. These are the same family members who would tell my brother, lean in harder, pray harder. I'm like,
Yeah.
I've seen how destructive that is. You're not going to bring that in my family. And it really has like divided our family. Like, I don't think that those members of my family think that we're Christian. Of course, there's a divide when it comes to my brother with my mom and my dad and kind of in that sense. But for me, the divide was you said this to my daughter, and I brought it up, and they were super defensive. They were like, are you asking us to leave our church? Because we're not gonna unless God tells us himself. Like, which is very common for people very in the James River.
Right.
So, not just them and their attitude, like it's very common. So it's created that divide. And coming down to the toes, it's like my perspective on the toes is also that you have people who thought this was real. They really did. They
Right.
really leaned into it. And by the way, I did show them the pictures just to be like, hey,
I
like
was kind of curious about that. Yeah.
I was like, hey, these aren't public at the moment that I'm aware of, but you need to see. Still didn't believe me. But they use the toes to basically say, if God can do this, then he can do this. But if that first instance is a scam, that's really hard to say. Like, if my God can do this thing that definitely didn't happen and was a scam and the church allowed to
Right.
propagate it as truth, then he can do this miracle. Then you're basing your miracles first off of something that isn't like true and isn't biblical, but you're giving people false hope based on something that didn't happen. And my husband and I are very comfortable in accepting of the fact that if my daughter, like if she were to be healed, fantastic, but that's not the focus of our prayer.
Right.
Our prayer is that she would be saved and that she would live a long, happy, healthy life, and
Yeah.
with or without a kidney. So, the toe situation literally like directly like came into conversation with my own issue when it came to miracles and healing my own family.
Well, and again, like we were talking about before, the greatest miracle is that God saves us. And then, even if we are going to look at the miracles in the book of Acts and in the Bible, what is the ultimate goal of those miracles? Always. It is always to point people to Jesus. One of the problems with the Bill Johnson God has spare parts in heaven or whatever, right?
Spare body parts room. It's just a closet up in heaven where they're like, go get another kidney, go get
Right.
another eyeball. Somebody needs to see.
But one of the problems is that is does God really get the glory in the show me the toe situation? In fact, with that, you don't really see the lady, and I won't take a position on whether or not she was part of it or a victim. I don't really know the details
Yeah.
too deeply, but you don't really see a lot of her like going around praising Jesus for this great miracle. It's more of just, hey, some toes grew back, and then we now know it's kind of a scam.
Well, even more so, it was kind of subtly credited to Bill Johnson and Randy Clark being there. It's like they almost became the person who had credit because in the presence of these two greater leaders who led these healing events, because it was done a certain way, God came down, and that's kind of how it was credited. It wasn't like
Right.
God, like I was praying in my bedroom, I was convicted by this service, and I watched my toes and here it wasn't anything like that. It was
Mhm.
in the presence of I think it was Bill Johnson at the time, but Randy Clark was there too. It's like at this Bill Johnson service, healing service that he brought on, this is what happened. I hate to say it, but it's like Bill Johnson was almost the god in that situation. I felt
Kind of
like.
a little bit, and again, looking back at what the Bible says, they always turn their focus back to God. Peter's walking around and somebody gets healed. He's like, I didn't really do that. Jesus did that. Whereas, I mean, yeah, I guess sometimes they do
I think they
use
give
that
lip.
terminology,
Yeah, they give lip
but
service to
there's
God.
definitely, like you said, oh, Randy Clark's here, Bill Johnson's here, and probably John Lindell when he goes and speaks at some place now, because he's kind of growing in that circle and he's bringing people in and he's going out, and it's probably kind of becoming that same thing where they're like, oh yeah, but remember at his church there was toes that were growing back, there was all these great things, and so it's again like you said, they almost become like the Holy Spirit follows those people, whereas what is the Holy Spirit supposed to be doing? Pointing us to Christ, right?
One of my
Convicting us of our
yeah,
sins.
and one of my dad's biggest pet peeves, we laugh about it now. It was a pet peeve when we were at James River. He hated when Lyndall says you may be seated in the presence of the Lord. Like, aren't we always in the presence of the Lord? Are we just? Is it just in this room?
Just in this room, yeah.
But I mean that's kind of how it's treated.
We've talked a little bit about it today, the NAR and prosperity and Bill Johnson. John Lindell has been bringing all of this in. That's a good way to kind of bring a lot of the things we've been talking about. Would you say that that James River is becoming part of NAR, part of the prosperity gospel, part
Yeah.
of all of that?
Well, I think they've always, I say always, I think they've been a part of the prosperity movement for longer than they've been a part of some of this more Nar Bethel movement. And I think it's really evident. Well, I'll say this about James River. I don't think James River has had its own solid identity as a church, like that they've just kind of come up with. And one of the reasons I say this is when being on the page and being the admin, you see a lot of both the anonymous and public people posting their stories. And there was one person who had talked about how very, very early in the church, I think it was their mom, had worked in the office, and that Linda was basing his sermons off of MacArthur at the time. Like it wasn't even like his own.
John MacArthur?
Yeah, John MacArthur.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, and of course I know some people have thoughts on that, but strictly to the point of they'll have their own identity. It's very much borrowed. To some extent, theologies, and perspectives are going to do that, but they did that for a while. Then Hillsong, it was Hillsong for a very long time, right? Like I can't remember why I know this, but I want to say that there was like James River had gotten either like hand-me-downs or like the exact same sets as some of the Hillsong sets at one point in the 2010s.
Weren't they using the Welcome Home that was the exact thing that Hillsong was using?
I don't remember that. I know there was like this octagon-y, circly backdrop on stage that Hillsong had, and you could see the backdrop on the Hillsong stage in some of these like I think it was the Hulu documentary.
Yeah.
So they were very much modeling Hillsong very heavily. And they, of course, were super into the prosperity gospel, probably more, in my opinion, than they were into NAR.
Yeah.
But then you have Hillsong starts crumbling. And so what comes out of the ash? Now you have James River modeling after Bethel. So I think that they've always been a part of the prosperity gospel for as long as at least I went. And of course, I think that that's also evident by their perspective on tithing. I know they're not the only church that has this view, but that one, it's required. And two, the whole like if you tithe, you're going to get something in return. I think the whole like wellness and fitness thing, like tell me why a church needs a fitness center. Like all of these things, like to me, scream prosperity gospel. But I think when you're sucked in, like the selling point for James River, at least for us, because some of this stuff is like known in the community, right?
Yeah.
Was that a lot of churches were kind of dead, like the one we were in. I say dead spiritually, they were dead. They're just big social circles. And basically, you have James River over here who's doing expository preaching. You know, John Lindell did take a stance. I don't very well remember this because I was a little bit younger and not in the politics, but there was that proposition, and I don't know if it was, you know, the town living or the county or what it was. There's a proposition about something when it came to like the gay, transgender, something, and he had said something, so that drew a huge crowd, and it was biblically consistent. So you know, in that sense, they get you, but on the back end, they were leaning prosperity gospel. I mean, I even remember my parents, you know, we were being told surprise check in the mail. It's always the story they tell you on Sunday is if you tithe, here's a story. Mike and them were really struggling with a job, and the Lord they really needed money, and then they decided to tithe. They committed to tithing, and the Lord gave them a check for the car that they needed because their other car broke. It's always that stuff. And my parents started tithing, and they got a surprise check in the mail. You want how much? $0. It was a check for $0. I think God is funny. But you know that was their leaning was prosperity. And you know with NAR, I think looking back, I think the NAR stuff started in 2018, 2019. I think was how far the sermons went back. John had been preaching sermons. I looked at this a couple years ago where he talked about how our words basically dictate reality. It was very softly worded to where you wouldn't really catch it otherwise. That what we say matters and that our words kind of dictate reality. And that is manifesting, which by the way, James River has very subtly preached manifesting, especially at least to its youth for a long time. This is a little off topic, but I'm very strongly about this. When you are young and a single female at somewhere like James River, the biggest thing is what husband does God have for you? So what they tell you to do is basically write a list of what you want in a husband. It can be stupid stuff because remember, something they preach, God is in the details. And they say, like, write this list and pray over, and God's going to give you that perfect person. Well, I'll tell you, I love my husband dearly. He is definitely the one for me. He does not fit a lot of things on those lists, that list for me. But if you think about the practice of what they're telling you to do for your husband, at least maybe on lower levels with some youth leaders, they're telling you to manifest your husband. Right. They're not really telling you, like, you know, just pray for a good, godly man. I'm going to say this sounds so mean, and if my friend ever does listen to this, you know, I love her. But I have a friend who, when it came to dating, was very into this, and she believed that God was absolutely going to have to and would give her a Chiefs fan. Like that was like one of the biggest like
down to the sports team.
And it wasn't even like I don't want to. It's like God's going to give me a Chiefs fan, and so all of that has been around for quite a while. But it was so soft, and now it's like just how it is at Bethel. They're like, if you say it and pray it, God's gonna do it because you have that power and
name it, claim it. Yep. All of that awful, awful stuff. No, manifesting, prosperity, NAR, whether those are official movements or just names we give these things, we are seeing a lot of that. Other churches, whether it's Hillsong, Bethel, and Elevation is another one that's problematic. Chris Hodges, what is that? Church of the Highlands. John Lindell had him in there, and he's like, "This is a pastor for pastors," and this big old thing, right? And everyone needs to listen to it. And it's like this really dumb sermon that he preached that was like so great that we all had to listen to, and there was like no gospel message whatsoever. Kind of, you know, heavy on law of like, here's a bunch of things you need to do, but all those things are very, like you said, kind of subtly creeping in. And I think James River has done a really good job of not of distancing themselves just slightly enough from everybody where, well, yeah, we had Bill Johnson in and I really like him. And yeah, we had Chris Hodges in and I really like him, but we're not necessarily the same thing. We're different. We're, like you said, they don't necessarily have their own identity. They're just kind of copying a lot of different identities and kind of creating something built around all of that.
And I'm not super educated on these institutions, but it's not like, you know, Southern Baptist Convention, like you're a part of the Southern Baptist Convention. It's not, I don't know what it's called with the Lutheran churches, but I know they have an official thing because a friend of mine is Lutheran. They have very official institutions. And I know that there's the Assemblies of God, but you know, the way that James River networks is not really like that specific like institutionalism of some of these denominations. It's very book oriented, it's very celeb oriented, and they're all supporting each other. One guy on YouTube pointed out that when one guy promotes a book, that's when all of a sudden he starts visiting the churches. He starts going around. It's basically a book tour to all these churches. And so it is kind of an unspoken network. And it kind of has to be that way.
Church of the Highlands, I believe, are the ones that started ARC
I
churches.
think so.
And we're going to do an episode just on this. so I won't get too deep into it. They go around and help smaller churches start up. What model are they promoting when they come up? And a lot of it is the same model that James Rivers trying to copy in all these different churches, and it's lack of elders. You need to write a book. So they're helping these like little mega churches. So they may never grow into James River size or anything like that. So they go around and like you said, they give book tours. The Sizzling Summer series is they kind of invite a bunch of people to come preach at James River, and a lot of those times John's not there. Maybe that's just his vacation time. Yeah. But he has spoken during that week at other churches, yeah, and I'm sure he's selling his book. And well, that's fine. He can sell his book. I don't care. But what's happening when Bill Johnson's there? He's selling his book. And this is getting into a realm of speculation. We'll get deeper into it in a couple other episodes. But who's buying those books? We know for a fact through Elevation that Elevation Church buys a lot of Stephen Furtick's books. Mm-hmm. So he's like, oh, well, I only really make the money off of my book sales. But your church bought a bunch of your books to give away for free or to sell. When you go speak at a church, that church buys some of your books to give away to their congregation. Is it unethical? It seems like it might be. Is it illegal? Probably not.
No, I don't. It probably. I mean, I don't know. I have my own speculations about if James River has, and just as a citizen, if they've been involved in legal stuff. And the only reason I say that is because there was an article that came out with Hillsong falling down that Hillsong was involved in money laundering schemes. And what kind of church was what? Well, first off, you had TD Jakes and those kind of figures involved. I want to say Church of the Highlands was potentially involved in it. And if a church like Church of the Highlands, which is I think on par with James River, was involved, right, and it had to do with the same elements of involvement that James River had with Brian Houston, I mean, I do question some legal stuff there, but in terms of book sales, I mean, I think it definitely crosses the line of unethical for sure. Mm-hmm. And to like, to what goal is like my bigger question? Because you look at places, and James River, I think, tried this. I don't know how successful they've been, but worship music is another big one. How do you infiltrate the small church? Mm-hmm. You do it with your music. A church that my husband and I have gone to, it grieves me. It's part of why I have a hard time finding a church is because they'll play the Hillsong, they'll play the Bethel, and the lyrics sound good, mm-hmm, but they're coming from people who I would argue are either not Christian or they're not talking about the Jesus of the Bible, right? Right. There's a lot of things there that theologically don't line up, even if the words sound nice. And so book sales are one way you get in. Preaching is another way, but then you have that as well. They have for a long time been singing Hillsong. Mm-hmm. For a long time they've been singing Bethel, and I think that that's primed the congregation who probably doesn't know a lot about Bill Johnson. They're right. Like, is this Bethel? Bethel? Oh,
we like their music. Oceans, right? Yeah, like Oceans. I wanted to thank you for running that page. I think I joined last year at some point. It was after Show Me the Toes, I think is when I joined. And I don't have a ton of experience with James River. Like, I mean, I'm listening to other people with way more in depth. We were only there for a short amount of time, but I have a lot of connections, my brother and family and friends and stuff. So I'm very invested in James River, but I do feel like I'm maybe more of an outsider because I didn't have that deep of a connection.
It's like the closer you get to the inner circle, like the worse it is. And that's evident from, since I am the only admin on the page, and I've tried to keep it that way just because I don't think everybody quite understands what the page is for sometimes, sure, which it's really hard. In reading a lot of these stories, there are a lot of stories when it comes to employees who had a lot of abusive stuff happen. Of course, people have been fired. There are NDAs involved with them, which is just like insane to me. I mean, at the recent Stronger Men's conference, even the Swartzwaller came out and said, "I'm under an NDA" with James Where it's like, what? It's like you're under an NDA.
Yes.
And it really is sad because even though I wasn't an employee, I wasn't like super heavy into volunteering or anything like that. Just hearing the stories and knowing that like that conviction to start the page really did fill a need in the community. Like I didn't realize how great the need was until after people started joining. It was very rapid. I think we're almost at 2,000 people, and it's expanded where initially it was for people who have left, and then it kind of expanded to you had pastors of churches who are like, I have tons of congregation members who are like, I'm either counseling or have fallen out, like have got out of James River and they're struggling. So I started including pastors who could help people in the page. Then you had people coming on who's like, my son is in the college and is stuck. I have this person, family member who is stuck. I can't get them out. It's divided my family. So the community impact that first off James Rivers had is just insane. And I think, when I started the page, I was like, there are probably hundreds. There are thousands of people who have been negatively impacted by James River. You wouldn't know that unless you kind of got everybody together. I'm almost like glad that in starting the page that it wasn't just like a win, like there really was a need there, because I really do think that that was like a strong conviction, and I don't think it was just me. It's just like I felt like I had to do something, and I think that God's used it.
Absolutely.
If not for, part of it was to find correct theology. People could talk about what correct theology looks like, but I think an aspect I wasn't fully prepared for was how therapeutic it is for people to just get out what happened to them,
Yeah.
to ask questions like, is this right? I mean, I don't think it happens as much anymore, but just the college students coming on and talking about what they went through. And of course, they like paid to go to the school. I mean, it really is just really sad and breaks my heart. But yeah, the fact that it's impacted the community, but like this page filled a need is just really, really good. I like not tooting my own horn,
No.
like it's just I am glad because I felt that it needed to be done for my own personal. I don't want to feel alone, but to
Mhm.
know that there were thousands of other people who felt the exact same way I did, it's reassuring that you're not crazy. The church ostracizes you when you leave. I know of somebody who said that their whole support system cut them off when they left.
Mhm.
Whole entire support, friends and family members. And to know that that's not just happening to some of us is, although it's sad, it's like reassuring, like, no, like we're not the crazy ones. Like this is real institutionalized like problems on the employment side, and really theologically troubling, especially for just people who go.
Well, and I've heard some stories of people who have left, criticized James River, lost some friends, and then like a year or two later, those same friends come back and apologize. Like, sorry, I didn't really understand what you were saying, but now, and I think that Show Me the Toes has helped a lot. I say helped in the sense that I think there were a lot of people who were just like, this is off. Connecting with Bill Johnson has also helped a lot because there are a lot of people, like you said, that Bill Johnson's off. We know he's off. So I don't really like him being here. And then we talked, or you just mentioned the latest Stronger Men's Conference. Obviously, that was a big fiasco. So I joined, I think I said last year,
Mhm.
after Show Me the Toes, and I had been thinking about doing something, and I wasn't sure what. I've made a few amateur films. I like film, but I don't have like the greatest equipment. I don't really have the greatest podcasting equipment either or anything like that. But I wanted to do something because I watched the Hillsong documentaries. I've watched like as many documentaries as I could on churches, and I was seeing the same things from stories, and then being in the group really helped too because I was reading all these other people's stories. I was like, okay, so it's not just a few family and friends, like you said, we're not alone. There's a lot of people who are talking about this. And so basically for the last year, I've been kind of working on this. And then this year I decided I think a podcast would be great. And then the Stronger Men's Conference was like, all right, we got to do this right now.
Like
If we don't do it now,
yeah.
it's
Well, we thought the toes was like, can it get worse than the
can get
toes?
worse.
It can. And I remember like more people have joined, I think, over the incident of Stronger Men's Conference than
Mhm.
the toes. It was reported on more. I mean, I love Good Fight Ministries out in like Blessed Hope Chapel in California. If I lived out there, I would attend. They're like, it's run by Joe Schimmel and Chad Davidson. Even they never covered the toes, which made me so sad because I'm like, come on, like there's a church claiming somebody grew 3 toes. They did cover the Stronger Men's Conference, and although they devoted most of the episode to Mark Driscoll, who does have plenty of things to talk about, and everybody has talked about it, at the very end, Chad Davidson compared John Lindell to Jim Jones, and I thought that was very appropriate.
Oh wow.
I was very glad somebody, he's like, this, because what he was talking about was the fact, and this isn't the first time he's done it, but I think it was the first really noticeable time. Lindell had said, don't touch, God's anointed, touch not the anointed, which has nothing to do with them. It's very
Right.
specific to the situation of King Saul and all of that. And he very appropriately called it Jim Jones type behavior. And it's because it is. And what's so sad is the people who are still really involved, like that is the level of which they look at Lindell, whether they are really conscious of that or not. It's really sad, but there are other people who have been in ministry a very long time studying this stuff who are now coming to the realization that it's not just Hillsong. It is these other growing mega churches like James River that are starting to do this, garbage stuff.
John Lindell has said, this got shared recently again when Bill Johnson was coming through. Oh, if people criticize you or try to share videos about Bill Johnson, you tell them that your pastor knows him, right? That he's actually spent time with them, and stop taking these clips out of context. people who are in like the discernment ministries, which is a lot of those people who like review sermon reviews. One of my favorites is Fighting for the Faith. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
ever heard that. Chris Roseborough has done multiple things on Bill Johnson. They're not taking little snippets. They're covering an entire sermon, sometimes in a sermon series. They'll spend like multiple weeks with these people and dissecting what they're actually saying. Bill Johnson believes that we're like little gods almost, right? Like we can be like Jesus because
Yeah.
Jesus wasn't really God. So when John says, I've actually spent time with him, it's almost like you're telling your people, it doesn't really matter what's out there, just listen to me.
Well,
And
yeah.
then I recently heard, I was talking with somebody, he told me that those people on staff are told, and maybe he said this publicly, I don't know, I haven't been able to find the footage of it. If you're on social media and you're doubting the church, that's your fault for being on social media.
Wow.
Which is essentially saying, don't listen to anybody online. We are your church. You listen to us. If somebody's putting out negative press about the church, we're going to put out the positive press. Just listen to what we have to say. I mean, I don't know how else you kind of word that then. Don't listen to anyone outside the church, only the church.
Yeah.
That's kind of cultish behavior.
It's very, at the very least, like an echo chamber type mentality. And growing up, my dad was very big on teaching me and kind of raising me in the idea of apologetics and being not scared of differing opinions or being scared of what atheists have to think or agnostics have to think,
Yeah.
being very open to listening because even if you don't know in that moment, there's an answer and it's something you can work through, right? It's like, why isn't that the position of James River? Like, look at everything online. And if you have questions, email, even if it's not him specifically, it's like, email us, talk to us. Like, these are things that we want to address. Talk to your life groups or be like, here are the biggest things. I do think John maybe had talked about this and did a really bad job, but really terrible job. Basically being like, these are the big things that people criticize Bethel for. And here are our responses. They really, even though I think they maybe took a little bit of a little sermon on that, if I remember right, that they kind of just shut it all down by being like, listen to us, we're the experts. I mean, and it's so funny too because I know so many like political conservatives who are at James River who politically are like, well, if the government says this, I'm not going to listen. I'm going to do my own research. And they said to listen to us, we're the experts on COVID, and look what like that's their mentality. But when it comes to James River, they're like, nope, John Lindell knows best. He's like the Fauci of the James River for like these political conservatives. So it's
Yeah.
wild that type of thinking of why are we scared of differing opinion doesn't go across the whole board of their thinking. Like in James River, we're only going to trust Lindell, but out here, we're going to question everything. We're going to look into every conspiracy. Like we're going to do everything to come to our own opinion, but that's just not promoted at James River.
No, I kind of agree with a lot of what you're saying there, especially like you said, it's ironic how people can have one view for maybe the world
Yeah.
and then a different view because it's the church, when really we should be integrating our lives entirely. There should be consistency there, and not just in how we live our ethics, but also, I mean, if you're going to hold the government to one standard, hold your church to that standard too,
Yeah, if you're
right?
gonna hate Fauci because he said, "Trust me, I'm the expert. Don't listen to anybody else." Why aren't you questioning John Lindell when he says that about something far more important, by the way? Like getting
Absolutely.
getting COVID, masking, wherever you stand on that ultimately is not like like eternal life and death. Like I guess if you're somebody who's like more progressive listening to this and you're like, I love Fauci. Okay, fine. That's not like the
Right.
worst thing in the world, right? But you're talking about like eternal life and death, what it means to be a Christian, what is salvation. If you're going to be critical of Fauci, but not somebody over here telling you, listen to me because I know best religiously, that's very alarming, especially when the church is constantly promoting that and clearly within its staff. I don't know how true this is, but one person who had left the church had even heard rumors that some of the major leaders that I was around when I was in high school didn't actually leave of their own volition. Like they all took jobs elsewhere, but they were actually fired for questioning Lindell.
Mm.
That's just rumor.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's true, but I wouldn't be shocked.
Sure.
So if you have a reputation of a church like that, it's important to question, and for James River, if it's really biblical, if they're really solid, they would be able to provide those answers, but they're not.
Have you heard about the lady who was removed from church by 5 individuals because she refused to take down a post, or was accused of refusing to take down a post. It's a very interesting story.
I think it was prior to her maybe getting asked out of the church, or maybe it was kind of coinciding. She was posting on somebody else's page, and I actually just reached out. I was like, "Hey, you should share this on our private page." I invited her, and then of course when she came on, she's like, "Here's what happened." It's like barf all this like terrible things. It's like on Mother's Day. Yeah, no,
So she was removed on Mother's Day by 5 individuals. I believe it was 3 staff, or 2 staff and three.
I thought it was three security guards and a couple
Yeah,
county
it was five
sheriff's
total.
officers.
I think it was 2 sheriffs and 3 staffers. But her posts had been kind of critical of the men's conference, which we haven't really talked about. She was kind of critical of that, John Lindell, and some issues with like finances and things like that. And hoping to have her on the podcast, but she was kind of critical, and then I guess they had asked her to take down the post, or they didn't ask her, actually is what she said, but because she didn't take it down, they like implied that she did, and she was
Yeah,
removed.
and they like dissected it. That
But
was the
literally,
weird
you
thing to me. They
couldn't.
dissected it and
Yeah.
like, here's your post. We have it highlighted and all these comments. It's like, whoa.
But the thing that's really interesting to me is they removed her from church for posting things that they didn't like. They didn't even want her to be in the building because she had posted things that they didn't like. They were critical of them. I know that somebody that was let go from James River, they have internally told the story that he chose to leave on his own, and that he was posting just all over the place, just so critical, and he was like, I'm just out. When the actual story was he was trying to make change from within, and then he wasn't really seeing anything, and so he kind of talked to people outside of the church. They found out about it, kind of digging, snooping into it. So then he ended up getting fired, and they asked him to sign an NDA, and he didn't. So good for him. And so hopefully we'll get that. I don't know when we'll get that interview out, but
Well, and it really puts fear. I know somebody roughly my age who is kind of getting into the inner circle of some leadership. I don't know their position exactly, but when they post about it, I see it. Not on the page. Like they're very involved in James River. And I actually reached out to them and I said, "Hey, do you guys like as like staff like have any just any perspective on maybe whether we agree with it or not, maybe we shouldn't have had, the guy swallowing the sword at the men's conference." And she was very much like, no, we trust Lindell and all this stuff. And this was right before the one person had gotten fired and didn't sign the NDA and has come out about it. But it really shows you how some of the stuff they're saying, like they might not actually, I'm not saying for this particular couple, they may be all in, but really makes you think like, are these people being honest when they're asked these questions, or is it like my livelihood is on the line? If I say anything to anybody, I could get fired. Because I know for my friend who was my maid of honor at my bachelorette party, which was not crazy or anything, but I was like, hey, maybe like a bottle of champagne to celebrate would be fun. Which, to be fair, I was like almost 21, but I'm like, you get married once. And I'm not saying that's, right or anything, but that was the situation. And her justification for being like, this is going to be a dry party, even though most of my friends were like 21 and over,
yeah.
Was not really. I mean, she kind of used this as an excuse, but it wasn't like, hey, underage drinking is bad, right? It was, or anything like that. It was, if I get caught with just a picture of, because somebody even brought up, what if we did mocktails? Like just, juice, right? Juice and fancy cup with water with umbrellas. She had said, if I get caught with pictures, and she was on staff at the time, I will get fired. If I just, it would just incriminating photos that may not even be alcohol. And for that reason, because she was organizing the party, she was like, not even mocktails,
Okay.
which kind of upset me because like, it's not your party, it's my party. I'm the bride. But it really shows you how under the thumb it is. Like, if it's that way with something like alcohol, which I know there are varying opinions on alcohol use as a Christian, but if it's that under the thumb with alcohol, I truly believe like when it comes to the more core issues of James River, that it's even more so. And you might have people there on staff who are saying all the right things, and when they're asked questions, they promote the church, but maybe when it's just them and their spouse, they're like, what do we do? Like, I don't know how to deal with this. If we say something, we're getting fired. If we say this, we're gonna get kicked out. We've dedicated so many hours. What will we look like? What more importantly, I would hope that people would wonder is like, what does this mean about our faith? What does this mean about salvation? Are we saved? Like really, important questions that might be going on behind closed doors. But James River is such, in my opinion, from just stories on the page, an abusive institution that people don't come forward. I mean, you're talking about an institution that this is kind of out of left field, but I have seen a lot of stories um, about individuals, spouses who one spouse was physically or sexually or in some way abusive, like criminally. I would say like they were
Yeah.
abusive, like in all regards, they're cheating or whatever. And I know of one instance where the couple got divorced and the church, knowing the allegations, took on the abusive spouse on staff. And others where in certain situations of counseling or whatever that they have brought in, this couple to counsel them, and they've taken the side of the abuser and basically told the spouse, like I said, multiple stories of this. They've told the spouse, well, you chose to be married, or you can't divorce. Divorce is a sin, or you're just stuck with this. You signed up for this. So I mean, you're talking about an institution that has taken on people like that on staff too. Like it is just an institution that I mean, I understand why people might be scared to leave at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, in all these stories you're hearing, after I posted that I was going to be doing this, I said, hey, if anybody, wants to tell their story, and the invite is still there, if anybody's listening to it and they're like, I have a James River story that I want to get out, please contact us and would set up an interview. But as I'm hearing these stories and you're hearing the same thing, and you're probably actually hearing more because you're actually running the page and like you said, people are joining and they're telling you things, and it's the same story over and over again of when you criticize, it seems to be that there's a culture there that isn't friendly to criticism at all. And so instead of being, oh, you have this concern, let's address that concern. Because even with the alcohol thing, in a very healthy church, and you're right, there's differing opinions on alcohol. I personally don't see it as a sin. I'll just throw that out there. Like
They
I
were
think
we're on the same page.
I
Like
think that you can find a good case to be made that drinking in and of itself is not a sin. Drunkenness, sure. I'm in agreement with you on that. But even if you go to a healthy church that says, a lot of Southern Baptist churches are this way, like you
we have
can't.
a very good friend who goes to a church that we visited, and the pastor was like, and drinking beer is of the devil. And I remember sitting there, I'm like, I love this couple. They have like such like one of the purest hearts. But no, I don't agree with that. So yeah, I mean you're right. There can be very, very healthy,
Yeah,
very conservative in terms of theology churches that believe that.
absolutely. And so when with the differing views in a healthy church, they're going to deal with that particular issue in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And so they'll say, "Hey, we heard that maybe you had a drink on, last weekend. Well, here's what we believe at this church. Here's why we think that was wrong." And you can approach that in a very healthy way. But if people are literally scared of even the appearance of possibly drinking alcohol because they're so scared of that, I 100% agree with you that once you start to get into other issues, which may be more important issues than that. Not to say that alcohol isn't an important issue to some people, people with addictions and things like that, but I'm just saying, like, you get into issues of you're having heretics at your church, you're having all of these fake healings. I don't think that you would feel comfortable then bringing anything forward. And I think there is sort of that internalization of like, I'm keep my head down. I like everything's polished there.
Everything's formulaic. Like
Yeah.
even in their theology, this friend, now this is just speculation. I don't mean anything ill against my friend or anybody my age, but they really make it sound like if you do XYZ, you will end up with XYZ. So if you, for instance, wait till marriage, and I have a friend who went through the premarital counseling, and she said that's like all they talk to you about is like waiting till marriage. Like you're engaged, and it's like, oh, you're
Yeah.
almost there. But like if you wait till marriage, your marriage is going to be perfect. Like in that regard, which any married couple is like, whoa, that's it's not formulaic like that, right? Like life's not perfect like that. Or, if you avoid alcohol, if you do all these things, or if you pray more, then this equals you having a better life. And this friend of mine, and I love her to death, had come to me and we were very divided. She wouldn't be involved in my life. And she basically told me, I'm jealous that you're married and I'm jealous that you have kids. And, I really struggle with this. And for that, like my heart, it's like, oh, like, but I think that it has something to do with a deeper issue. If she's going to a church that I once also bought into this idea that if you do everything right, like everything you want will come to you. And so you think about it this way: you have a girl who wants to be in a relationship and wants to be married and wants to have the kids and all that. And I had other friends like this as well. And that's not happening for you. Like you're doing everything right, but that's not happening. They have a friend over here who's not in James River and not doing everything right, and is not praying that to the same degree on Sunday or whatever. Or you know, at the time, I would drink the occasional drink. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that they get it, then what's wrong with me? It's kind of like the same thing as the healing. It's like, what am
Right.
I
I
doing
was thinking
wrong?
that.
God, why can't I have everything I want? And I just speculate. I don't know if she would agree or deny that, but that's kind of what I noticed in our friendship, and that's kind of how it is. Like if you do everything right, everything perfect will come to you.
Right. It's the same thing with the tithing. If you tithe every Sunday, if you give 10% or more, you can't outgive God, right? All of that, then you will be blessed tenfold or hundredfold or however many folds it is nowadays. Well, thank you so much, Kadie, for being on here today with me, and we've had a really great talk. We've been talking for quite a while now, and it's really great to get to know you. I know you through the group. I've seen, comments and posts and things like that. Is there anything you want to say about the group or about anything else that any closing thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, so it's of course it's a private group now because as people on the page point out, there have been spies. And I've seen them. That's always
Real
fun.
quick, okay, we're gonna pause. That reminds me of a question, and they're tied together, okay?
Okay.
First question is, has anybody from James River reached out to you because of this group? And second, these spies, what's up with the spies? So those are kind of two
Yeah.
separate questions, but kind of in the same vein. Because I forgot I was going to ask you
Yeah.
that.
There's not very many that I've seen. Of course, it is hard to vet everybody to the nth degree. I don't have time to Facebook stalk 300 people at a time, right? When the page was public, the former, I don't even know if I want to say his name because he's not a public figure, but the former worship leader actually tried to post on the group, and I had it set to like you have to be approved. Tried to post to the group a very demeaning post where it was like, "This is divisive. This is James, whatever." Very, very in support of James River. And I actually reached out very long message to this guy, and I was like, "Hey," because he had specifically said the admin should be ashamed or something. I'm like, "Hi, I'm the admin. I'm a real person with a face and a family." And I had messaged him. Nobody has reached out to me that I can think of off the top of my head. Of course, I haven't gone through my whole inbox of requests because sometimes I get a lot. But some people who did try to join, I speculate there was a Lindell who did try to join. It was a cousin, I think, somebody out of state. I think they lived in Colorado or something. And I was really
You're
torn.
sure they're connected?
Yes,
Okay,
they
okay.
were. They were.
It's not just a
Yeah,
random
I
name.
think David Lindell was the first person to show up that I noticed in their mutual
Okay.
friends. And I was really torn because I thought, is it possible that not all the family agrees with the Lindells and maybe they have a story? But then I was like, I don't want to risk it. And that's when I started instituting the you have questions to join. It's like a little interview process, and you have to answer all the questions if you want to join. Otherwise, I say decline.
Yeah.
Even if you just forgot, like, come back and ask again. But one of the Lindells did try to join. The former worship leader had joined when it was public and tried to post, and I kicked them off. And there have been people who have come on, and a lot of it was when the page was public. I think that was the onslaught. And so now it's a more vetted process, but I wasn't able to go back and find everybody. There are people who will join the page. Some people will message me and be like, "Hey, I know this fact for a fact this person goes to James Church. Look at their page. Go to their page." It's like, look how many people were saved at the week of power this past
Yeah.
Sunday. And so they are on there. I don't think there's as many as some people maybe are paranoid that are,
Mhm.
but they're definitely there.
So you haven't had any interactions of anybody coming at you other than that youth
No,
pastor,
yeah.
yeah,
I was
worship leader.
I was worried in the beginning that if this got traction, that like somebody from the church would reach out in a threatening way. Just something I was prepared for. Like they have attorneys and stuff, but not that I'm actually afraid anything illegal is happening, but I was just preparing myself like, hey, this might actually happen against the page.
Yeah.
Because they are very, I think, concerned about that kind of criticism. And I don't know if maybe the page just isn't big enough. Maybe if it gets to a certain point, they'll start to eyeball it a little bit more. But that was something that I had kind of emotionally prepared for in the beginning.
Well, I know on their posts, any posts that they do, like if they do their Wednesday night prayer service, it's public. And I was watching when he gave his, I call it a press conference, but when he gave that um, Wednesday night after the Stronger Men's
They
Conference,
called it repentance
yeah,
that was promoted with tithe money.
I was commenting on the
Mhm.
post on the thing live as I was watching, and they were getting deleted so fast. I mean, there was
Yeah.
some poor intern there that night was just deleting, deleting, deleting.
Some James River College student with
I
unpaid
think they
comments.
eventually just turned him off because it was just
Yeah.
easier.
Well, and they've been I've had comments deleted on much posts from years, like a couple of years ago when Bill Johnson first came. Like that's the censorship I think is more noticeable now, but
Mhm.
it's not new. They were deleting some of my comments a long time ago
Sure, yeah.
on Instagram, which is super fun.
So sorry to interrupt your little spiel there,
Yeah.
but it just that popped in my head of asking you about if anybody from James River had reached out to you or anything like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the group, you're the admin of it. You can share the name if you want. I haven't shared
Yeah,
it.
it's called Finding Jesus After Leaving James River. It's the only page with that name that I'm aware of. And one of the things that actually I bring to the group again, because there's so many new people, people will often criticize why it's called that. They're well-meaning people as well, where like, well, I know Jesus and I left James River, whatever. But the purpose of the group, the reason that I really felt called to name it that way, or convicted to name it that way, is because James River is not preaching Jesus biblically. Like the Jesus they are preaching is not the Jesus of the Bible. And even if you've grown up a Christian, even if you are a Christian at James River, I think there is an element of finding who Jesus is after you leave.
Absolutely.
Not everybody on the page is even a believer, too. There are people who have been so hurt by James River they completely left the faith, and there's nobody reaching out, there's no ministry, there's no voice for them talking about their experiences. Maybe if they go to therapy, that might be some of the only things they get. And so that's part of why it's called that, because the goal is that by coming onto the group we can have not only just discussions about theology and what is correct theology. And to be fair, there are people on the spectrum everywhere. I mean, at one point I remember the Calvinists versus the non-Calvinists became a doctrinal subject. But you have charismatics who have left, who are on the page, and maybe just not as charismatic. You have Calvinists who have always been against this theology, and really the page talks about what's wrong with the NAR movement, what's wrong with James River. You also just have testimonies of people who have left who just want to talk about their story for the first time ever because they've not had an audience. I say audience, like they haven't had people to talk to,
Yeah.
like, or anybody who would care to listen, because often when you leave you're more surrounded with the people still there than the people not. And so that's the goal of the group, is to just give a community to people who have left or who have been impacted by James River, who really just need to find that right relationship, even if they know what it is, just to continue to help others. So that way, as there's this onslaught of people who need Jesus, and need to hear the gospel, especially coming out of the institution that is James River, there's just a community for that. And so if you want to join, it's on Facebook. I'm going to say this to people because not everybody reads this when they join. You do have to answer all of the questions, and for the most part, like I do the vetting process pretty thoroughly. There are people who will go like, want to, curious, have left, whatever. It's like, give me a real, like,
Yeah.
use full sentences so I know
You don't
that
need
you
a
are.
novel, but you don't need
Yeah, I don't
two
need it.
sentences.
Well, and if you want to write a novel, that's fine. I'll read it. I do read them. Sometimes my husband will ask me, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Sorry, I have people asking to join, and they're telling me their life story. It's totally fine." But yeah, if you have left James River, or if you have family members stuck, or even if you're a pastor who has dealt with the James River issue specifically in your congregation, and you're wanting to help guide people afterwards, a lot of people on the page are looking for churches. That's the biggest thing I think people struggle with, finding churches. Feel free to request to join. Like I said, full sentences, please. Tell me why you want to join. Tell me a little bit about yourself. And yeah, that's, I want it to be a place, and I want it to be more well known, not because of anything for me, like, it's not to my glorification or anything, but because I know that as much as our group is big, there are still lots of people out there who aren't aware there's that community, aren't aware that there are other perspectives, and don't really know what to do, and don't know that there are other churches to go to. They think that Hillsong and Bethel are the big ones, but James River has just as much impact as those churches. And I think that in the future, unless something happens and they crumble, you're going to see them come to the stage a little bit more competitively with these churches. And so, yeah, if you've struggled with that in any capacity, please feel free to join, and reach out and tell your story. I mean, as much as I know that you're having people tell their James River story, if you don't want to on a podcast, a lot of people anonymously talk
Absolutely,
on page.
absolutely. Well, no, thank you so much for running that page. I found just a lot of value just because I have a big heart for people who have been church hurt. My church hurt story actually is not at James River. It is actually at the church we went to before the current church we went to after James River. So in that period of time there, it was a great church. We loved the pastor. And then that pastor decided to take a different position at a different church, and they brought in a new pastor. And that pastor was like a dictator and fired some elders. Or I can't remember exactly how it worked, if one just retired. But anyways, he installed a new elder. He said he was an elder and started preaching just heavy law, like you need to do all these things, right? And I kind of had approached him about a few different things, and at one point he basically said, "There's the door, you need to leave." He blatantly lied in front of the entire congregation about me. Nothing bad. It was actually a good thing he lied about. He said he offered me a job that he never offered me. But it was to not give me that job.
Right.
I didn't even apply for it, you know. So awful situation. There was a lot of things that happened. It's not the place to unpack all of that. Maybe I'll post it in the group just so people
Yeah.
can be therapeutic with it. But all that to say that church hurt, I have a big heart for it because I was bitter at the church. I didn't give up Jesus at all, but we spent some time, my wife and I, not in church because of our experiences at this church. And it's been a big process of finally realizing what our own theology is. So we started going to a Lutheran church, and I know that's kind of like a weird out there thing for some people, but we found a lot of value there. And I'm at the point now where I feel like get into a church. If you are charismatic, there are churches that are charismatic that are not bad. They're still preaching the gospel. If you're a Calvinist, I love Calvin. I was a Calvinist for 10 years. Like there are so many good Reformed churches. There's actually a new Presbyterian church coming into Springfield, I think in the fall. And I'm so excited for that. If I wasn't a Lutheran, I would probably be a part of that church plant. So I'm really excited about that. That's going to be really great for a lot of people. So there's a lot of really good churches. I found a lot of value in like liturgical church stuff where, you know, we say the Lord's Prayer, we say the Apostles' Creed. It just reminds us of those basic, you know, church doctrines. All that to say, whatever your specific sort of theological bent is, find a good church that will help you grow, because as long as our focus is on Christ and salvation by grace through faith, that's the core of Christianity, right?
Yeah.
It's not by works. So if you're in a works-based church, maybe find a different one. But if you're at a church that is preaching the gospel, that it is all Jesus's work on the cross, and that's how you're saved, that's a healthy church in my opinion.
Yeah.
And who cares what the music is, unless it's Bethel or Hillsong. But you know, if it's hymns, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That doesn't mean you're a dead church just because they're singing hymns or
Right.
something.
Well, and especially, you said that it was a process with you and your wife. For anybody listening who's like, oh, maybe this person has it all together. My husband and I don't. We haven't solidly found a church, and we left years ago. And my convictions are very strong about the music, and so if it is really hard to find a church, you're like, gosh, like, am I a good Christian because I
Yeah.
can't find one? Um, you're not alone in that. Talking to the audience here, I know you found a church, but it is really hard, and we are, I mean, not to mention we have like bazillion kids, it feels like, and on the on the way. So that's already its own challenge in going to church, but it is really hard to find, I think a church anymore really easily because of so much stuff. And that's where the page really tries to focus on that. You're right, they are out there.
Mhm.
But don't feel like, I think it's important not to put all the emphasis on church. And James River puts all the emphasis on church.
Correct.
That there are, I mean, if you really think about it, like there are house churches out there with good believers in it. Like they're like, it really doesn't have to even be institutionalized, in my opinion, like like Southern Baptist or Assemblies of God or whatever. All that to say, it is a process, and you may not find a church immediately. It may take a period of time of figuring out what theology, figuring out, like, I think the hard question for me was, am I even saved? Like, have I dabbled in the new age? Am I a new ager with some of the stuff that was happening at James River? And those are really hard reflective questions that I think come naturally after you leave somewhere like James River or leave a church just like that. And it is a process, and it is okay to go through
Absolutely.
that and to work through that. It's not going to be an overnight process, at least in my experience.
Oh no, absolutely not. And like I said, we were in the non-church category for quite a while. And it's actually funny because I was reading a lot of theology, watching a lot of theology stuff. I felt like I actually grew a lot, but we were just so hurt by the church that we weren't actually actively involved in a church. We visited a lot of different churches, and just none of them felt what we were looking for. And I think ultimately I didn't realize it, but I was just kind of slowly developing Lutheran theology without realizing it. Um, but you're absolutely right. I don't have it all figured out either, and my thing is just to encourage everybody to not give up Christ because of the
Yes.
church hurt, and to continue to pursue him, to continue to read. If you want to join this group, join the group. Talk to people. You can post on our page and send us messages, and we'll talk to you about stuff. If you have questions, that's a big thing. Is at a church like James River, if you have a question, you might feel like you can't ask it because then you're going to be critical. Oh, is what Bill Johnson's doing, is that wrong? I don't know. That seems, I don't find that in my Bible. Those are questions that are totally welcome in your group, and I love to have those kinds of conversations too. So it's healthy to ask those questions, and that kind of helps you develop your theology. So I would just say to anybody listening, just really encourage you to not give up God just because you've been hurt. And I love your group. I've seen a lot of really great interactions, some interesting ones too, but but it's been a really great experience, and thank you so much for being on. I feel like we've got like the celebrity of the group on the
Oh, no,
podcast.
don't
So
feel like a
yeah,
celebrity.
no, you're the one that started this whole thing. So, and I do feel like you do get a little bit of credit because as I was looking at reading these stories, it was like, okay, I want to tell this story about James River, but there is a story to tell, and
Yeah.
it wasn't just my experience or my friend's experience or brother or whatever. It was, no, there's actually an experience here, and it's varying. And what we're doing with these interviews is we're putting pieces together for the listener. I think your group does a great job of ministering to people and letting people kind of vent in that sort of safe space.
Yeah.
This is a public space where we're going to try and build the case with different episodes, different interviews with different focuses. If it's a former employee, they're going to talk about those sorts of things. If it's you told us about your experience, and
Yeah.
different people will have different experiences, and hopefully we can sort of build the case with our first season here of what's kind of going on at James River. Because really, this season is looking at kind of that mega church. The podcast called Bad Fruit, which is based off of the passage where Jesus is talking, looking out for false teachers because they're bearing bad fruit. And so we're kind of focused just on that sort of mega church NAR kind of theology, and we're kind of microscoped in on James River and using it as a case study to kind of look at all of that.
Yeah.
And so we are local here. James River's local, so it just kind of makes sense. And again, we've been wanting to tell the story of James River, and now I feel like with all of those things, especially with the men's conference, it's like there's an explosion here, and I really feel like, and again, I'm just speculating, who knows, but I really feel like we're on the cusp of James River either going full on like just Bill Johnson gaslight everybody that anything bad ever happened, or maybe falling apart like Hillsong did.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it could go either way at this point. And I think it's because of this men's conference event. I think there's enough people who are looking at this now. I mean, you mentioned you're a conservative. You probably know who Matt Walsh is, right?
Yes.
He talked about the men's
Matt, a
conference.
lot of people had takes on it. I thought Matt Walsh had a very good, which I know that like a lot of Christians, like he's Catholic. I still think he had one of the better takes on the internet of the
And I
conference.
and I'm not even taking a position on whether you should listen to him or not. I'm just simply saying even that
Even the
level
even
of
the Daily Wire with all of the stuff that they
they
do.
do, they were able to do a whole segment on it. And I'm not a huge Matt Walsh fan, but that particular segment was probably the best.
Yeah, or Brandon Tatum did. I mean, he's doing a whole thing where he's kind of talking about pastors in general. He's been covering that case of the I don't know what the status is, but the woman who committed suicide allegedly. He's been doing that,
Oh
but
yeah.
he's covering that. But right before he got kind of in an episode, like an episodic covering of that, he was like covering James River and talking about how his comments were getting deleted by James River. And he's not a I don't think a very religious. I mean, he's Christian. He proclaims to be a Christian. I don't watch a lot of his stuff, but he's primarily a political conservative.
Sure, yeah.
And yeah, a lot of them have covered. I think Fundy Friday. I don't know much about that podcast, but is one that covers kind of like this controversial culty stuff, and I think they even touched on.
Aren't they isn't that an atheist who runs that one?
I don't think they're a Christian, but I don't listen to
Yeah.
them. So what I know could be
I
like
think
just.
they were in the Shiny Happy People
I think they
documentary.
were. I think
Yeah.
they were. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like it
But
just
yeah,
to show it's not even just like it's all kinds of people.
right. And I think that was my main point is, and you're agreeing with me and actually validating the point even more. It's not just us locally who have been there. This has reached national level. And maybe it's partially because Mark Driscoll's involved and he's got his own controversies and everything like that.
Yeah.
And he's kind of a name brand speaker kind of thing. But at the same time, I think this event with a sword swallower and everything, like it was just so big that people had to comment on it. It just you could not. So I do kind of feel like we're at this point now where it's starting to kind of come bubble up. So again, just appreciate you running that page. Any closing thoughts, and then we can just kind of end the podcast.
I guess my only closing thought or thing would be, like I said, if you want to join the page, you're more than welcome. But if there's anybody listening who is at James River or at a church just like James River, you're listening, you're like, gosh, it sounds a lot like my church. I guess my personal encouragement to anybody would be one, like, don't be afraid of questions. Like, just personally, do not be afraid of asking questions or somebody asking you questions. It's not personal, at least most of the time. It shouldn't be. I know there are people out there, but don't be afraid of questions. Don't be afraid, like, if you question God's anointed or if you do all these things like that, you're not going to be a Christian. Like, I think the Bible has a very strong case for, questioning and being skeptical and using the word. Know that you're not alone, know that it's not bad to ask those questions. I think that's just the biggest thing. And if you're even just for a second taking a second to consider, do I need to leave? Is this the place for me? Don't like let that little thought just go away. Like, really, find people. You're not going to find them at James River, but find people in your community um who will talk to you about these things, and maybe other pastors, other whatever you can to get out, because I think the theological part is really hard. I think the community part can be harder for people. And so, like, know that there are those of us who have left, who have gone through it, and there is a brighter side on the other side. And that I think that Christ's work is working these things for his good, like these doctrinal problems coming to light. I think that it's a very good thing. Don't be afraid of asking those questions. Don't be afraid of reaching out, because those of us on the other side, it's not just that we want to win against James, or like we genuinely care about you who feel stuck and don't know where to go, because we've been there. So yeah, that would be my closing thought is, don't be afraid. There's more of us than I think many realize.
Thank you so much for listening to my interview with Kadie today. I hope that you found value in our conversation. I know that it was very eye-opening and revealing for me to hear her story. Already, with part 1 having been released last week, we've gotten some feedback about how it impacted you guys. So thank you so much again for listening. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/badfruitpodcast. So go ahead and like and subscribe on all your favorite podcasting apps as well, so you don't miss out on any new episodes. Next week, we get right back into the conversation that we started a couple weeks ago. We had an episode called Red Flags. We got a lot of really great feedback from you on that. And so we're just going to jump right back into our conversation with a topic that we have called collateral damage. I hope that you will listen. Here's a little teaser for it, and we'll see you next week.
This manipulation of scripture and then giving the ramifications to say this is the word of the Lord, and then to tell a couple they're going to be holding a baby by this time next year. And this is my point that we have to reiterate. Every single couple has to have the baby,
right,
that is struggling medically, because that's what the prophecy was.